First, second, or third person. Does it matter? Welcome to Jenn's Writing World. If you have a story to tell, you are in the right place. Let's do it one day at a time. Oh boy, big topic today. We're going to discuss point of view. I'm going to start by saying that I'm not covering everything. There's just no way. It is a really big topic. People make entire classes based on just the topic of point of view. But today I want to briefly cover different types of point of view, but more importantly, I want to talk about why you should be using point of view, which point of view you should be using, and how to know you're doing it properly. So, every story has a narrator. Somebody is telling the story. Now, that person may be a fly on the wall watching the story happen, or it may be one of the characters that are intimately involved in the story. Doesn't matter. Every story has a narrator, therefore, every story has a point of view. Point of view is not difficult. You and I talk all the time. When I talk to you, I am telling you my version of stories told from my point of view. I'm not telling it from my friend's point of view, my brother's point of view. It is from my point of view because I am the only one who knows what I know. I can't know what anybody else knows unless they tell it to me. In stories, it's a little easier to fudge the point of view because the author does know what all the characters are thinking. But this is the important part. In most point of views, you get one person telling the story, one narrator. There are exceptions and we will discuss them. But your one narrator that gets to tell the story, you kind of got to stick with them, at least in the scene that they're in. And it's not hard to do so, but it's also very easy to tell us things that other characters know, non-point of view characters. You have a group of characters standing around, they're all talking, and suddenly you get the thought of somebody who is not your POV character. Now, does the reader care? They may or they may not, but you're losing tension, you're losing conflict, and you're losing the connection with the POV character. So let's start by describing different point of views, and then we'll move on to how we can make sure that we handle them properly. Well, I guess the first thing to start with would be first person. We've all dealt with first person. First person is I. I did this, I did that. You can know my thoughts if you're reading a book because you're in my head. Me, I. It can be we, but we're not going to cover that. We're going to just talk about I today. If you want to write your first person in we, be my guest. I did that once. It was awesome and challenging. So we're sticking with I today. You would think that I, first person, would be the easiest thing to write because it is how we talk. When I tell you a story about when I went to the store, I say, yesterday I went to the store. I don't say, yesterday she went to the store. Now, we're talking about third person later on, but the curious thing about it is if I is so easy that we use it in our real life, why is it considered one of the more difficult things to write in fiction? And I think the reason for that is because people think it's very limiting. However, while this is true, because in first person, you know what one person thinks, their mind, nobody else. And if that person is lacking in information, then it doesn't work. A great example of lacking in information is an Anne Rice novel. She's known for all those vampires, but she also wrote a couple of books about Jesus as a child in first person. Now, these are very interesting books, but if you are going to write about a period of time that is historically important, fraught with conflict, and you do it from the point of view of a child in first person, that child does not understand the religious and political things going on in their world. How can they? They're a child. And so if that is your POV character, especially written in first point of view, well, it lacks a lot of detail. I read this book. I thought it was okay, but I really wanted to know more about the time period and the history and the conflicts going on. And there was no way to tell me that because the narrator was a child. Another fun thing to do is to make the narrators a dog or a cat. And that is kind of a great way to, one, guarantee that you're going to stay inside that POV. And you're also going to make sure there's lots of things that the readers don't know, because dogs and cats and other animals tend not to know things. On the flip side, though, I read a great book in the Bernie and Chet series, there we go, in which the dog, it's in the point of view of the dog, figures out who the murderer is, knows for sure, and thus the reader knows too. But the dog has no way of communicating this to the people who need to know. And because you're in first person or first animal, there's no way to get out of it. And so it was actually a little frustrating to be the reader and to know for sure, 100% sure, who the murderer is because the dog saw something, and then have to figure out how we're going to lead the people to the answers without actually telling them. It was crazy. But you know what? Being in first person in an animal's mind is a really creative way to tell a story. So I would say do not be intimidated by first person. If you are having problems with your POV wandering, try writing in first person, because the one thing it will do is it will lock you in, because the minute you start saying I, you're not going to be talking about anybody else. Another thing though, and I know authors do this all the time, but I am really begging you, if you are in first person, I did this, I saw that. If a car goes by outside and I don't hear it and I don't see it, you really shouldn't say, I didn't see the car go by, because you cannot actually talk about something you don't even know happened. Now, if you're writing it as a memoir, this is different, because you are writing it from the future to the past. But if you're writing it as a memoir, and I would say How to Train Your Dragon, the books, is a great example of writing a memoir. Establish in the beginning that you're writing a memoir. That way, when you do put in things like that, we understand that you are writing it from the future, and therefore you can know things that happened in the past that when they were happening, you couldn't know. We're not talking about memoirs today, though. We're talking about point of view. I'm just saying that in general, it is something that gets done by lots, even best-selling authors, and technically, it's not sticking with point of view. If you're interested in reading books in the first-person point of view, well, there's a lot of them, but 3 that I think are definitely worth reading is Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Okay, I talked a lot about first person. I don't think I'm going to talk as much about second person because it's just not used that often. However, last week when I talked about new and emerging genres, one that is emerging is Choose Your Own Adventure, and I didn't talk about it. But these are not just the 1970s, 1980s Choose Your Own Adventures that I read when I was a kid. They are expanding into all genres, and they're getting really creative. But these type of stories are in second person. You know it's second person because the pronoun that is used is you. So you say you went to the store, you talked to so-and-so. And the whole point of that is it makes the reader feel like they are doing the actions. They are having those thoughts. They are talking to those people. And so it kind of just sticks them right into the story. Thus why Choose Your Own Adventure works so well, because the reader actually then gets to choose whether they go to the store first or whether they talk to someone first. Do they take a nap? Do they, go down the Oregon Trail? That was one I read. I died every single time in that book. I'm not sure there was a way to make it to the end, and I really tried several times. So the second person can be very, very fun. It can also be difficult to maintain for an entire story because the reader can get tired. However, in short stories and in Choose Your Own Adventures, which you may notice tend to be a shorter form of stories, they can be a lot of fun. I personally have not read a lot of second-person point of view stories recently. However, two of my favorite authors have written these stories, and I suggest trying them out. And one of them is Romeo and or Juliet by Ryan North. I love his books. And the idea that he wrote Romeo or Juliet as a choose your own adventure is pretty fun. Here's a hint. You're probably going to die at the end. The other one is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, a new author that I have discovered who I adore. And so I totally recommend checking out her book too. I also included a list in the notes of different second-person books if you want more. It should be said that in the notes are many, many links to various websites dealing with point of view, book lists, and more in-depth topics than what we're talking about here today. All right, next we're going to talk about third-person limited. This is probably the most common way that people write. It's the way a lot of beginner readers start. It's how many, many of our books are written. But notice I said limited. You may have heard it as just third person. But third person limited is basically first person, except you use he, she, they as your pronoun instead of I. You are not allowed to head hop in third person limited. In your scene, within your section breaks, within your chapter, however long that person is the point of view character, you are in their head only. Thus, the limited part of this. And you may be like, wow, that sounds really boring. I really want to know what that guy over there thinks. Or maybe something's happening and the point of view character is not there, but the reader needs to know. We will talk about down below different ways that you can play with point of view so you can make this happen. But this is important. Third person limited is inside one character's head. One at any one time. And if that character does not know what somebody else is thinking, the reader's not going to know either. That's not a bad thing, because the reader doesn't need to get confused. You as a writer have a job of telling the story, but the reader wants to be able to follow the story. And so by giving them one POV character at a time, telling the story, they might be an unreliable character, they might not know what they're talking about, but by telling the story from their point of view, the story is richer and more full, and the reader gets more absorbed into it. So this was kind of interesting. I was looking for Omniscient books to tell you about, and a bunch of the books that came up in Goodreads that were listed as Omniscient were actually third person limited. And I thought it fascinating that people thought they were omniscient. And I'm going to give you an example. The Harry Potter books. I hope you have read them. If not, go read them. They are amazing. But that entire series is in Harry Potter's point of view. Now, are we sometimes in Barry Crouch's point of view? Are we sometimes in Voldemort's point of view? Yes, we are. But Harry Potter sees these scenes. He is either having a vision, he is having a dream, he has stuck his head in the pensieve, and if you don't know what that is, read the books or watch the movies. And so he is watching the scenes emerge. We then stick those scenes in somebody else's point of view. But that's not actually true. You don't know what they're thinking. You never know what Voldemort is thinking. If we knew what Voldemort was thinking, that would be brilliant. You know what he says. You know what he acts. You don't know what he's thinking. And the reason you don't is because in Harry Potter's vision, you don't get it. When he sees Voldemort through the snake's eyes, Nagini, it doesn't actually change the point of view. It's still Harry's point of view. It's Harry's point of view. It's what he is seeing through the dream he's having through the snake. Does that make sense? So it can be easy to think, oh, she went omniscient because we switched the character telling the story. Not true. When you read it, you will notice that she stays in Harry's point of view 100% of the time, which means if Harry doesn't know it, the reader doesn't know it. It also means, and if I'm giving spoilers here, seriously, these books came out a long time ago and you should have read them. When Voldemort starts to manipulate Harry's dreams, Harry becomes an unreliable narrator. But notice, we don't know that Voldemort has manipulated Harry because Harry doesn't know it. Thus, we are always in Harry's point of view, and so Harry saw a dream that was true. He believes that he is seeing true all the time. It's not true. He's actually being led by Voldemort, but he can't know it because we're not in Voldemort's head. We don't have Voldemort thinking, ha ha ha, I am going to screw with Harry Potter. We never get that. Unless it comes out of his mouth and Harry's standing there, we'd never ever get that. Instead, we get Harry having dreams that are not accurate. But until Harry learns they're not accurate, which he eventually does, the reader does not know they're not accurate. Third person limited. Okay, so Omniscient, I love reading books in Omniscient. I genuinely do. I love head hopping. But I read a lot of books in my book group in which people say they are doing Omniscient, but it's not true. So here's the trick with Omniscient. In Omniscient, the narrator knows what everybody sees, what everybody does, and what everybody is thinking. And that's the difference. In third person limited, you can know what other people are doing or what they're saying, as long as they are saying it to your POV character, but you can't know what they're thinking. In first person, you can only know what the first person narrator is thinking. You can't know anybody else's thoughts. You can know their actions, you can know what they say, but they might be lying, could be unreliable. However, in Omniscient, you can know what everybody is thinking. I like to think of a graphic novel to kind of explain this. In a graphic novel, you get to have two different types of bubbles. You have talking bubbles and you have thinking bubbles. And in a graphic novel, everybody can have a talking bubble and a thinking bubble. And we know that the thinking bubble means that only the reader and the character having the thought knows what that thought is. And sometimes it's snarky, sometimes it's, making fun of another character, but that character doesn't know it because they can't read thought bubbles. Speaking bubbles go between characters. Thought bubbles are between the character and the reader. And Omniscient is the same way. It is a great way for you to learn what everybody thinks. And it's a great way to throw in conflict because maybe it's a romance and the girl is all like, oh, I love you. And in her head, she's thinking, oh, won't the wedding be gorgeous? And the guy's like, yeah, I love you. And in his thought process, he's thinking of another woman. The character, the female character, does not know what he's thinking, but the reader sure does. And thus, it changes the story. It gives you information that maybe makes you not like the guy, or maybe makes you feel pity for the woman, which if you didn't know the guy's thoughts, you couldn't have those feelings. So Omniscient can be very, very important. But here's the trick. Two characters in a scene, they both get to have their thoughts told. What you don't want to do is have the woman be gushing and thinking and be in basically her point of view, and you never hear what the guy is thinking until one time he looks out the window and wonders if he needs to wash his car. Okay. If he only had one thought through an entire scene, that's not Omniscient. That's third person limited, and you strayed. If it's Omniscient, let's give me more of him. Give me his thoughts equal with her thoughts, and then you have a true Omniscient point of view. And if you have larger groups of people, then you have more thinking. So Omniscient is not as easy as everybody thinks it is, because if you do it wrong, you're basically doing lazy third person limited. And if you're doing right, then you have to control or figure out what all your characters are thinking. And you should know what your characters are thinking. They're your characters. But letting the reader know what they're thinking, that can be something totally different. Now, as I said up above in third person limited, I was surprised at how many books people said were Omniscient were actually not. I do have one, a favorite book of mine. If you haven't read this book, seriously, go read this book today. And that is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Honestly, I would have you read it before you read Harry Potter. This is a brilliant book. And part of what is brilliant about it is the omniscient narration. You know what everybody is thinking. You know what the Vogons are thinking. You know what Arthur Dent is thinking. You know what the mattress is thinking. You know what the petunias are thinking. Everybody's thoughts are out there on the page. And that does two things. One, it explains the crazy galaxy that he's trying to create. And two, it makes it funny. And that is something that Omniscient can often do, is it can insert humor in, because people's thoughts that they don't say out loud are often snarky, which is pretty humorous for the reader, but if they actually said it out loud, would be offending somebody else. So they keep it to themselves. We all do this. We all have snarky thoughts inside of us. And so for the reader to know your snarky thoughts, that can add humor to your story. Okay, so there are 4 different point of views. There are others. We talked briefly about unreliable narrators, which I'm not going to get in today. We'll make that a 5-minute talk during our write-in sometime. But now I want to talk about the importance of POV. Do you actually have to follow these? As you know from other videos I've made, I'm really big on the idea that they're more like guidelines. But in this case, yeah, you should stick with POV. It tightens up your book. It makes it more interesting. It improves the tension. It improves the conflict. It makes your character more tangible. The reader will connect with them easier if the point of view character is one person and you stick with it in that scene. And so you can do Omniscient. Be my guest. But I will tell you right now, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a great book. But the only reason you really connect with Arthur Dent is because he's like human and we're human and we understand his foibles. We do not actually like get a deep connection with one character in the book. It's very difficult to do so because we know what everybody thinks. There's nothing wrong with that. But part of what makes books bestsellers, and when you think of really, really good books, often it is because of the character. It is because of Harry Potter. It is because of Ishmael. I mean, there are other characters in Moby Dick, but you really want to know what happens to Ishmael. He is telling the story. It is his ordeal, and you kind of get really attached to him because it's first person, and he's just pouring out this story to you. And so sticking with your POV choice means that your book is going to be better. So in this one case, I'm going to say, yeah, follow the rules. Okay, well, now we're going to go break the rules. I just got done telling you why you should follow the rules of point of view, and that is true. But you do not have to write an entire book, 80,000 words, in one POV unless you want to. You can make a scene one POV, and then you can make the next scene another POV, and the next scene. And you can do what Game of Thrones does and have dozens and dozens of people and switch the point of view between all of these people. Totally legit. Remember what I said though, scenes. Have your scene be one person's POV. When you change point of view, when you hand the POV stick off to someone else, you change the scene. Now, are you still in the same scene? You can be, but you change the scene because scenes are what characters see. It's what they interact with. And how I interact with a scene, with a room, with an event, is going to be different than what somebody else is going to, how they're going to interact with that event, that scene, that room. So, page break or chapter break. Somehow you're going to say this scene is in this point of view and this next scene is a different point of view. You're not going to just blend it all together. Can you? Yes. But you want to make sure that the reader understands when you change point of view, because otherwise they're going to think for longer than they should that character X is the point of view character, even though you switched to character Y, but they didn't catch on. Section breaks, chapters, that allows the reader to know that the POV character has changed. So, can you change your POV character? Can you have dozens of point of views in your book? Yes. You just want to separate them so that the reader knows we're in this person, and now we know we're in that person. It actually can be a great way to write a book. Maybe you don't know what POV to write in. Maybe you have this story idea, but you're like, do I write in first person? Do I write in third person? You're probably not writing it in second person, but who knows, right? Maybe I should try Omniscient. How can I tell? Oh, this one's easy. Just start writing. A story, characters will let you know. So if you start in third person and you're writing he or she or they all over the place, and you suddenly notice you've switched to I, it will probably be unconscious. You won't even realize it. You'll go back to edit and you'll be like, wait, when did I go to I? At that point, you're going to be like, wait, this character does not want to tell this story in third person. This character wants to tell this story in first person. And then you'll go back and you'll try it in first person and it'll be a much better fit. So don't stress over your POV. You can make the decision in the beginning if you want, but if you just can't decide, start the story and your characters will let you know how they want their point of view to be apparent. So don't worry about which one you choose because it doesn't really matter. Does it change the story? It can. But honestly, the difference between a first person story and a third person limited story is really the way you use the words, not what the character does. So yeah, don't stress over that. However, once you've gone back and edited and you have picked a point of view because your characters let you know what it is, start that point of view in the first sentence. Make it very clear to the reader that you are in first person. The easiest way to do that is to say I. This one can be a little trickier. As I said before, your characters are going to let you know whether they should be in first person or third person. But here's the question. Can you write a book that has multiple types of POV, not just multiple POV characters? Yes, you can do whatever you want. As long as you follow the rules, have fun with it. There's a great book by Laurie R. King called Locked Rooms in the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes series. And up until this point, all of the books have been memoir style first person in Mary Russell's point of view, which means if Sherlock Holmes went off and did something by himself, the reader did not know about it until he came back and told Mary Russell what he did. Not a problem. It worked very, very well for many, many books. In Locked Rooms, it's a more personal book. Mary Russell is an unreliable narrator because a lot of the events that they're investigating happened when she was a child, and so she did not have an accurate account. So apparently the author wanted us to see Sherlock Holmes finding out the truth before he tells Mary Russell. She wanted the reader to know. So in this one book, she did Mary Russell's parts, her scenes, in first person, memoir style, as always. But then she did chapters in which Sherlock Holmes was the point of view characters, and she did them in third person, making it very clear that we were no longer in a memoir style. We were not reading a journal from Sherlock Holmes. We were basically just experiencing the story with him as he went off on his own and discovered things that Mary Russell did not know. Now, eventually he tells her. So the reader could have learned it at that point, but I think that there was an impact. Or it was just the author finally wanted to give Sherlock Holmes his time to shine in the sun. It worked very well. But the point is, for POV is, you don't have to stick with one type of POV. You can have one character in first person and another character in third person. You can have one chapter that is in first person and another chapter that is in Omniscient. You absolutely can. But clarity, understanding. We want the reader to not be confused. We don't want your editor to be confused. So, section breaks, chapters. We use those things so that the reader clearly knows that we've moved into a new section with new point of views, and everything is fine in the world. Okay, I talked a lot today, and there's a lot more that can be said. But what I want you to have now is the confidence to go forward, to write your story, to use POV so that it works for your characters and your stories, so that your reader has clarity, understanding, and an attachment to your characters. All I can say is your writing should be fun. The rules are meant to make the writing more fun and more creative. So use the rules to your benefit. Phew, I feel like I want to go write something. Join me on Tuesday and we'll do another 2 long sessions of writings. If you want to get all of my videos, you can subscribe down below. A like is always appreciated, and I would love it if you would share the channel with your writing friends. Today's quote is by Mark Winegardner, and he is an American author who continued the Godfather series, and this is what he said. No good writer sits around waiting to be inspired. If you're at your station, inspiration will find you. I do believe that is true, and that inspiration is going to have a point of view. So long from Jenn's writing world. Until we meet again, write, write, write.